Hey everybody, this is Joseph here, and I'm pretty excited to be doing this podcast today, discussing the topic of filmmaking. And I have with me today Garry Nation. He is a Christian actor who has been acting for, if I'm not mistaken, around 9 years now. Is that correct?
Yeah, actually, the my first film that I was in was released in 2013.
Perfect. So right around 9 years ago. That was
Mhm.
indescribable, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Perfect. So he's been in numerous films, and I'm not going to do the whole intro for him because obviously he can introduce himself better than I can for him, but he's an exceptional actor. I've very much enjoyed his acting abilities. He's been in films like Polycarp, Chasing the Star, and most recently in the hit TV series Vindication. So thank you so much for joining us today, Garry. It's very nice to have you.
Thank you, Joseph.
Of course. So we're going to start off with a little bit of a question to just kind of set the framework for the discussion.
Just
And
just a disclaimer before we get started. I reviewed the questions, the kind of topics that
yes,
you're going to be talking about today, and I just want you to know, rush right up front, I don't know the answer to any of them. So,
well, perfect. That's why it's a discussion. So that's not a problem at all. I think you'll have more perspective than I would because I always talk about this stuff. And then it's easy for people to shoot at me. Well, you don't know what you're talking about. You're not an actor or a filmmaker, but you are. So your perspective at least has a little more weight to it. But I think the first great question to start off with is why is it so important that we as Christians use the medium of filmmaking to present the gospel?
because that is the central, most esteemed cultural medium in existence today. That's why. Why would we not?
Well, I think in many cases, what we see happening in America now is people listen to Hollywood before they listen to preachers and pastors and the ministers. Before they read the scriptures, their go-to is what do celebrities say? What does Hollywood say? And I'm not saying that necessarily we should feed that kind of ideology to turn to them for answers, but at the same time, if that's where they're going to with answers, why don't we use those mediums to give these people the answers that they're looking for? Because the other aisle is not really presenting the truth, and they're not presenting the gospel. And so I think it's not only a privilege of ours but a responsibility.
We need to submit to the marketplace where ideas are being discussed, and where they're being discussed not merely on an intellectual level, but on the artistic level. Art precedes philosophy in so many ways.
Mm-hmm.
And yet philosophy is what undergirds art. And when I say philosophy, I'm using that in the broadest sense of the term.
Yeah.
I'm in this philosophy in the sense of what do people regard as being A, true, and B, significant.
Mm-hmm.
Philosophy as a set of ideas, and ideas have repercussions, ideas have consequences, and sometimes those things are worked out artistically before they ever get put on the ground and
Yeah.
used.
That's really good.
And if false ideas are worked out artistically and presented persuasively, that can be disastrous for a culture. And I think that's what we've been seeing in our
Mm-hmm.
culture. I think we've been seeing a lot of the development of worldviews and concepts. They've been made real to people, and people who wouldn't be conversant about the ideas as ideas
Right.
are conversant about the stories in which they're presented and the characters who make them persuasive.
Mm-hmm.
So what we've got to do as Christians is to construct art that presents true ideas, which are grounded in the Logos, who created all things, through whom all things were created, and present those in the same persuasive ways that the world presents its false and Satan oriented ideas.
Yeah.
The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, the world and they that dwell therein.
Yeah.
That same psalm follows up in the next thing. Who shall ascend to the hill of the Lord, and who shall stand in his holy place? He that has clean hands and a pure heart, who has not lifted up his soul to that which is false. We've got to first make sure that we do not lift up our souls to falsehood. And then in our art, make sure that our art presents a contrast, a beautiful contrast
Yeah. Yeah.
to the falsehoods that are presented as beautiful, but have a hidden hideousness.
Right. That's a very good point, though. I do think that in many cases, art emanates from the person who is creating it, and it carries their ideologies,
It does.
their worldview through it. And so in many cases, what should precede our art is us making sure that our worldviews and mindsets are in accordance with the scriptures, because as we begin to create art, it could either carry a truthful mindset or a false mindset. To switch to a little bit of a different question, though, and this is a question for people who are wanting to get into filmmaking and acting, before we get into some of these other questions.
Sure.
Obviously, you've entered acting the last decade, so you haven't done it your entire life. So what would your recommendation be to someone who's wanting to get into acting just like you did back in 2013?
I've been asked that question before, and my answer is I haven't the slightest idea. I have, other than this, follow the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
Don't follow your ambitions. If the Lord has put an ambition in your heart, then follow him, but not the ambition. Let him be the Lord of your ambition.
Yeah.
Now, I never had acting as an ambition. My primary calling is to Christian ministry, and it still is.
Mm-hmm.
And I haven't left the ministry to become an actor.
Yeah.
I have entered a dimension of ministry through my acting. And not every film that I act in is a quote unquote Christian film, but everything that I do, I want to put to the service of my Lord. All the choices that I make, I have to be careful what I choose, that it is reflective of what my calling is.
Yeah.
Because everything that I do goes through all of that calling. And that pertained through that. I never expected to be doing what I'm doing at this season of my life. But how it came to me was entirely through the providence of God.
Yeah.
Acting has been a lifelong interest and study of mine. In 2011, a friend of mine who had written a Broadway-style musical on the story of Esther, he got an opportunity to produce that on a local stage using local talent. And he had involved me in the demos up until that time. And so he basically drafted me and said, "You're playing Mordecai." So I got to do that. It was the biggest, best, and definitely the most challenging thing that I had ever done dramatically.
Right.
Far beyond anything that I'd done before, even though I'd done some pretty good stuff before. It really did require me to stretch and to do things that I didn't know that I could do. And I really felt at the end of that production that, okay, Nation, you can call yourself an actor now without feeling like you're just putting on something. But it was that musical drama that directly led to my being cast as Rabbi Meir in Indescribable. It was a one-day shoot on location, one of the hottest locations in one of the hottest summers in the history of Texas, on one of the hottest days of that summer. It was an incredible experience, but it was a great experience. And at the end of it all, I thought, Lord, I really didn't enjoy this. Thank you for this opportunity. If you'll let me, I'd love to do this again, but that's all completely in your hands. It was that role that led directly to my being cast in my first lead role as Polycarp. I still marvel at this. In my second time on film, I get to play the role of a lifetime. Right.
I mean, Polycarp is a huge role. Yeah.
For any actor, it would be a role of a lifetime kind of a role.
Yeah.
And I love it. I thought it was a beautifully written role. I thought it was a beautifully written character. And I knew who Polycarp was from my study of church history. But so I was fascinated with it. But when I saw the casting notice, I thought, being shot in Ohio, who's like, I'm going to go to Ohio to make a movie. Then I get a personal invitation to audition for that role.
Wow.
And it was directly related to my performance as Rabbi Meir. We shot Polycarp in the summer of 2013. And it was a long drive home after that. Lord, what have you just done here? What's going on with all of this? It was really incredible. People were toward the end of that were asking me, "What are you going to do next?" I said, "I didn't know I was going to be doing this." I don't know what. And it was for that at the International Christian Film Festival in Orlando, where I was awarded, very much to my surprise, the Best Actor in a Feature Film.
Right. That's
Year.
fantastic.
This is in my second time on film.
Right.
The Lord is saying...
And you hadn't really taken any acting lessons per se prior to this. It was just you following the leading of the Lord as He continued to open one door after another.
And the Lord was and continues to be my agent. He has assigned an assistant agent.
I dare anyone to find a better agent.
But the Lord has really, he's the one who, what I'm saying is the Lord is the one who has brought me into what I'm doing. It has been just following what He has opened up to me that has brought me into the realization that this is what He's got me doing now.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, ultimately, I mean, if this is what God has created somebody to do, and it is His plan for their life, then it will come to pass. And that just requires us as Christians and believers to listen, to follow, and to obey. And yes. I mean, God doesn't need our help. If He wants it to happen, it's going to happen.
Now, this is not.
I think that's a very
This isn't the same thing as being passive.
Right.
This isn't the same thing as being passive. I haven't been passive in all of this.
We're gonna switch to one of the different points right here. And I'd love to get some of your perspective. There's numerous different questions that I don't think we'll get to all of them, but kind of talking about the issue of filmmaking and some of the things that we can do to grow as filmmakers. I would first of all, just for kind of a fun question, just kind of looking for a quick answer, but if you had to quickly say, what are your thoughts on secular filmmakers entering the Christian world? You have people like Ridley Scott making Exodus, Gods and Kings. You have Mel Gibson making Hacksaw Ridge. You have, the original and then the remake of films like Ben-Hur. And we're excluding films like Noah that are completely off center when it comes to the Bible. But some of these other films that at least kind of tried. What are your thoughts on some of these Hollywood productions of biblical stories?
It depends. Because it really depends on the filmmaker.
Yeah. Ridley
Scott doesn't have the theological understanding of a third grader in Sunday school. And his version of the Exodus story reflected that. It made no sense. And it had a vision, and it was a soured vision of God. Mel Gibson, his Christian faith may be in a very peculiar Roman Catholic sectarian group, but he does have an Orthodox view of God, of Christ, and a basic understanding of salvation history that is reflected in his films and his worldview. I would say that he does have a Christian worldview. It may not be a pure Christian worldview, but it is a Christian pretty solid Christian worldview.
Right.
Okay, take the contemporary filmmakers of today, and then you've got Roma Downey Jr. and her remake of Ben-Hur. Her Christianity, it's basically Orthodox, but as a much softer type. You're going to have a reflection of the filmmakers and what they're looking for in their films. Contrast the contemporary biblical films made by secular filmmakers with previous generations.
Yeah.
Think Cecil B. DeMille and the Ten Commandments and William Wyler and his rendition of Ben-Hur. Then what you've got kind of is an interesting difference. They were filmmakers who were making Christian films for a public which still had a pretty broad Christian worldview.
Yeah, they still had considerable knowledge of the scriptures contrasted to people today. Yeah.
Yeah. And those weren't directed at the church audience, but they were directed at an American culture, which the majority of Americans at the time, in the late 50s and very early 60s, considered itself to be essentially a Christian nation in an informal sense. And they're looking at biblical films and making epics. In the 1970s, you've got Franco Zeffirelli, one of the great Italian filmmakers. And he was most renowned for his Oscar-winning movie, Romeo and Juliet. Well, he made a television miniseries called Jesus of Nazareth, which was very, very good, flawed, in a lot of ways, but very, very good, and still hearkening back to that epic concept of Christian filmmaking.
Yeah.
And contrast that with Dallas Jenkins' The Chosen, which is made essentially the same way as a TV, not a miniseries, but
Right.
a TV series. But Dallas Jenkins, one of the interesting things about that is that he has chosen, and it's a generationally genius approach. Don't try to make it a blockbuster epic. Make it on a ground level approach. You look back at the publication notes
Yeah.
of all of these other films about Jesus. King of Kings, the greatest story ever told. Jesus of Nazareth. All of these films like this, every one of them has in their publication notes, we wanted to make a human Jesus. Because the only thing unique about the human Jesus is his divinity.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
It's his deity as a man, God becoming a man, that is uniqueness. Dallas Jenkins, in his approach, is presenting Jesus as the Son of God,
yeah,
truly a man. And
yeah.
It's that ground level approach rather than the epic approach that is selling it more than these others.
I think that's the big difference is these secular filmmakers often use such a gloss because they're familiar with the blockbuster approach and they try to use that same approach. But you did mention Dallas Jenkins, which did bring up one of the points that I wanted to discuss, which is Angel Studios, which I don't know what the future holds for them, but from what I see right now is they're really revolutionizing filmmaking as we know it currently within the Christian movement. Obviously, they crowdfunded The Chosen. They're currently crowdfunding an animated movie based on the life of David. They've put out an animated demo, and it looks really fantastic so far. And they're really starting to do a lot of crowdfunding for different filmmakers, and I didn't know if you were very familiar with that or if you had any perspective on if possibly Angel Studios is kind of bringing another chapter in Christian filmmaking.
It could be. It could be. One of the things it's helping to do is to break through the money wall.
Yeah, that's an ever-present issue with Christian filmmaking is lack of budgets.
Yeah, and the money wall, which has been dominated by Hollywood. And even after the breakup of the studio system, which occurred in the late 20th century, the Hollywood studios have remorphed into conglomerates that are power structures. And don't misunderstand, the power and the money go together.
Yeah.
And the one really can't be separated from the other, but it's hard to tell whether these studios have accumulated power in order to make money or they're accumulating money in order to gain power.
Yeah, yeah.
And so this crowdfunding, which funding of any kind is something, let me put it this way, that's not my gift, that's not my field.
Right.
I'll confess to you, I'm not entirely comfortable with crowdfunding because it depends on the crowd.
Mm-hmm. And is it because you're at the mercy of what the crowd wants you to create? Is that kind of your perspective of it?
Yeah. And what do you have to do in order to get the attention of the crowd and to gain the favor of the crowd?
Yeah.
What crowd are you looking at?
Yeah.
We're all dependent on funding in order to get done anything. Mm-hmm. I'm grateful that God has opened up this way for different things. Where it goes from here, I don't know.
So it's just one of those, I guess one of those cases we'll just see what happens. And I definitely understand your perspective. I understand one side of me is excited that for the first time we see these films and productions actually receiving the budgets that they need. And then I do understand the other side of it where we don't want to see Christian filmmakers resort to, the Hollywood production, whatever it takes to make a dollar. If that means watering down the message, if that means toning it down, make Americanizing something that's not necessarily American in its nature just to make a dollar. I definitely understand that. One other question I wanted to touch on was, why do you think that, I feel like there's this persona around Christian filmmaking that seasoned moviegoers typically, and not in every case, but typically view Christian films as inferior. And especially by secular critics who continually bash Christian films. And I'm not just talking about Christian films that are, poor acting, poor writing, poor whatever, but even Christian films that have budgets, that have really good actors, directors, and what I would even consider to be fairly well-made films. And I have a pretty high standard, but even those films are being bashed by secular critics to the extent there's very few Christian films that even received above Rotten ratings in Rotten Tomato, for example. Is this because of a bias on the part of secular moviegoers, or is it some other reason? What's your perspective on that?
Well, I think there's a bias on secular movie reviewers.
Yes.
First of all.
Yes.
And I think that is the case. Honestly, Joseph, though, I think the bigger enemy of Christian movies, if there is some force that drags Christian filmmaking into mediocrity, this might be a controversial thing to say.
Throw it at me. That my channel thrives on controversy.
I think the biggest enemy of the Christian of excellence in Christian filmmaking is the Christian film audience, the Christian film market.
Yeah. And how so? Could you elaborate on that? I feel the same way. I'm just curious if you say that for the same reason that I would say that.
I think it's a complex of things. I think it's a complex of a Christian who consider themselves, we want Christian films and we want them to be excellent, but their definition of excellence isn't artistic. It's religious. That's why it's going to get controversial, because it is a matter of religious. It's got to be religious purity is more important than artistic excellence.
I'm eating this up, so keep going. This is very good.
It's not that I am a fan of an impure artistic presentation, impure theologically, impure morally, or any such things like that. That's not what I'm talking about. We have not been educated. We haven't really even been exposed to very much real artistic excellence. Mm-hmm. We haven't been exposed to the fact, to the artistic excellence of Christian artists of various kinds throughout history.
Yeah.
Who in their own age created an artistic language for their own age and shaped the definition of excellence for their own age.
Yeah.
And we also have not appreciated the fact that those artists who did that were heavily criticized at the time and very rarely appreciated for what they were at the time. Mm-hmm. It's never been an easy thing to be an artist in the Christian world or the secular world.
Right.
It's always been something that's been a difficult sell. But the thing that sinks Christian films into mediocrity I think it boils down to an attempt to compromise the art in order to make the message.
Right. I think you've absolutely hit the nail on the head. That's been, for a long time, my biggest criticism of Christian films is that we so often are overly focused on presenting a message. And I always have to balance what I'm saying because, we have the most powerful message of all time. And we'd be fools not to give that message to the world. But we're so focused on portraying a message that we don't focus on the storytelling. And it's like we sacrifice one at the expense of the others, when rather they should duly carry each other to portray what is this powerful medium of filmmaking. And I think as far as the audience issue, that's one thing that's always bugged me about Christian filmmaking is not necessarily to say Christian filmmaking needs to have a blockbuster approach, but if you study the films in the secular world that are impacting the highest numbers of people, they are in genres that Christian films are barely touching. Namely, you have action, animation, and you have some of these genres. Action and animation are two of the biggest ones. But what I've always noticed is that I actually looked it up one time, the top 100 grossing Christian films of all time, and I believe a 60+% of them were drama films. Not bashing drama films, but I know that looking at the audience around the world, more people are watching action films than any other genre. And so I was wondering, where are the Christian action films? And people have made them. You have the Burns brothers, who did Beyond the Mask, I think was an excellent film. You have Pureflix did the Samson film. You have, back in the day, I'm excluding the 2014 remake because that one doesn't really count, but the Left Behind movies. You have, Pureflix has been, with David White, has been trying to make numerous action films, in a lot of cases feel more like clones than their own movies, but they're at least trying. But it's, you view these films and it's like the Christian audience isn't receiving them, because I feel so many of us in this Christian audience are just looking for these films that have these emotional twings to them that make us cry, that make us feel inspired, which is great. But it's like we're distancing ourselves from the genres that the world is receiving. I use the analogy of, you know, if you're in the safari and you want to catch animals, why don't you go to the water hole? Instead of trying to convince the animals to follow you into the middle of the desert, go to the water hole where they're at. If people are watching those genres, why don't we take the Christian message and present the gospel in a manner that is going to reach this audience that is already consuming this type of film?
Yeah. There is and will always be a need to have a movie that to use film in order to present a message. By the way, the world does that too.
Oh, of course. Usually with catastrophic results.
Usually those aren't highly received and highly reviewed films in the secular world,
Nope.
by the way.
Nope. And that's one thing I've noticed is when you try to use a film, when you create a film for a specific segment of the audience, whether you're on the left or the right, it's usually highly controversial and poorly received. And that is something I've noticed, whether you're on either side of the aisle.
That's true. But there is a need and a use for that. There are some Christian filmmakers who think that that's all you're supposed to do. Well, that may be all that they're supposed to do. I would like to see, I think what we need to see, if we're going to break through all of that, I think we need to see is not Christian filmmakers, but filmmakers who are Christians.
Mm.
And the focus of what they want to do is to make excellent films. Doing so, they will be making them out of who they are. And if they are children of God, that light is going to shine through. Let your light shine. Jesus didn't say shine your light. He said, let your light so shine. You are the light of the world. Let your light so shine before men that they will see your good work in film.
Right.
And glorify your Father who is in heaven. It was a little application of the words of Jesus from the Sermon on the Mount. As I say, not every film that I've been in is a Christian film. I have the film company for which I made Chasing the Star. By the way, Chasing the Star is the theme of that is the Magi. The star that they were chasing was the star that was leading them to the Messiah.
Uh-huh.
But the focus isn't on the Messiah. The focus is on what was the motivating factor that was leading them, and what were the challenges that were interrupting their quest. So it was really a reflective piece. And there were people who, one of the complaints that that film got from, guess who? The Christian audience.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Was, this film isn't biblical. Can you tell me where the story of the Magi is in the Bible?
I mean, that's one of those areas where it's kind of, it's like that artistic freedom that The Chosen takes, for example, because they have to flesh out some of the backstories of these characters, and it's the same approach here, I'm sure. But
that was one of the more Christian films that I've been in as a Christian film.
Yeah.
But I've made two other films for that same with that same company, not for that same, but with that same company. One of them, I played a prosecuting attorney in Man's Best Friend, and most recently, this past spring, or actually this last fall, was in Iowa, shooting a film, a World War II era film called Silent Night in Algona.
Okay.
Based on a true episode of something that took place in a town where a German POW camp had been established. The relationship between the town and the German POWs that were there. That's not a Christian film. but the values, the biblical values, and the worldview that is presented there, and the faith that is demonstrated by people in the community and characters in the film, it will have an impact.
Right.
It will have an impact,
Right.
and it really comes through. I think we need to have not just Bible movies made, and I love Bible. One of my earliest interests has been in Bible movies.
Yeah.
Some of my biggest disappointments have been in Bible movies.
Yeah.
You want to know what probably the biggest disappointment that I ever had in a Bible movie? It was King David, produced in the 1980s. The maker of that film was Bruce Beresford.
I don't think I've seen that one.
It starred, okay, first of all, the casting, all the way. Richard Gere was cast as King David.
I'm gonna pull this up while you tell me about it, so I can know a little bit about it as you're describing it.
You had Richard Gere cast as King David. Hey, first of all, spectacularly miscast. He did what he could, but he's spectacularly miscast. Brilliant British actor Edward Woodward.
Best known as Saul. Yep.
As the Equalizer on TV. Wonderful actor. Was cast as King Saul. King Saul was a man that the Bible describes as standing head and shoulders above all of the other Israelites. Edward Woodward doesn't stand head and shoulders.
I see it right here. He's 5'9".
I mean, now Woodward. Now here's the interesting thing. Woodward was the most believable character in the whole movie.
Right.
But all of that swept aside, and we get back to the problem of secular filmmakers trying to make biblical films. Bruce Beresford's concept of King David was diametrically opposite to the biblical presentation of King David.
Right.
And at the end of it all, that great model of the temple that he had constructed so that his son Solomon could build it.
Yeah.
David goes through and in fury and anger with God for letting the baby die, who was his son by adultery with Bathsheba.
Yeah, yeah.
In his fury over that, he takes the sword of Goliath and demolishes that model. And
that's very much a misconstruing of even how the Bible describes it by a long shot.
And then his last words on his deathbed to Solomon was, "Don't listen to the prophets, follow your heart."
Wow. There's definitely some of those films where I look at them and I think, I don't know if they could have been further from the truth if they had tried. I think if I had to pick my least favorite time a secular filmmaker tried to make a film with a Christian theme, it would definitely be, well, I would give the top two both to Martin Scorsese for his Temptations of the Christ with Willem Dafoe, and his film Silence, which to me is in many ways a highly blasphemous film, which basically, I watched the entire film and I was, watching at the end, I had to stop and think. I was like, what is he even trying to say with this film? And when I finally realized the whole theme of the film is more or less, it's okay to deny Christ as long as you still believe him in your heart. Mm-hmm. And you have this one priest who denies Christ, but yet as he's burning at the end of his life, you see he still has a cross in his hands to show that he had never given up on his faith. And it's such a blasphemous message, because what does the Bible say? He who denies me, I will deny before the Father. And it's these secular filmmakers many times just don't get it. But we're gonna end this with, I think, what could be a fun question. Okay. And it's easy to talk about people who did it wrong, but I'd love to hear if you had to pick a secular filmmaker who made a secular film, not even a Christian film, but made a secular film and presented an amazing worldview in it, what would your pick be?
Fascinating. That is.
It's time for us to praise somebody who did a great job.
That is a great question. And you know what? I'm going to go back to, it's probably a surprising answer here. It surprises me a little bit.
Let's hear it.
The Avengers, Infinity
Really?
War, and actually the original Avengers movie.
Uh-huh.
The Avengers, the first Avengers movie. I think what you've got there is you've got an interplay of a number of things in which there are identifiably biblical themes, such as the nature of jealousy,
Uh-huh.
and the importance of unity, the nature of love. And there's even that wonderful line by Captain America as he steps out to confront
Is
Loki,
it
and
the one where he jumps out of the
just
airplane?
before he confronts Loki, he said, "Aren't you afraid of confronting a god?" He says, "There's only one God, and I don't think he dresses like that."
Right. Right.
Was one of
Yes.
that may be the best line in the whole Marvel Cinematic Universe.
You know what? I'm with you there. I'm with you there.
But
Yeah, that's
yeah,
definitely an interesting pick. We've been actually, this has been a great conversation. We've been going on an hour now, so I think I'm gonna finish it off now at this point. But thank you so much for joining this conversation today, Mr. Nation. It's been very interesting, very thoughtful. I think you've given me a lot of great sound bites that I can share with the community and so forth. A lot of really, really good thoughts. So thank you so
well,
much.
thanks. I've had a great time.